Resident Evil 4 was a household favorite of me and my brothers when I was growing up. So many iconic moments that I remember from the original. I remember when preteen me first saw Leon getting his head chainsawed off, and it was like, whoa, this is on the Nintendo GameCube, for God's sake. Leon, being the utter badass that he was though, made the game much more approachable for me, as I was never that big into horror games. But the way Leon's character shined throughout the game's morbid events made it special to me, and it makes me think back fondly on Resident Evil 4 all these years later. Now, hearing the raving reviews for RE4 Remake was especially exciting. One of my favorite games, remade to absolute perfection, according to critic reviews. Steam had its rating listed as overwhelmingly positive, with fans saying that this was probably one of the best remakes in recent memory, an utter masterpiece. And to say that had me excited was definitely an understatement. But now, having finally finished Remake after making sure to take my time with it, I feel a bit empty. And from general fan reception, this feeling kinda has me feeling left out.
Oh, you're kidding me.
As for the reason why, I guess the best way to sum it up is that the devil is in the details with this remake. But before I get into that, I want to talk about what this remake improves on from its predecessor, because it's absolutely not all bad. One of the greatest improvements on the original has been in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Aiming in the original feels clunky and awkward, and back in 2005, developers were still trying to figure out how to implement a proper third-person shooter. Camera controls were awkward, and games still didn't have a dedicated control stick solely for moving the camera around. Rather, you had to rely on this awkward 180-degree turn half the time to try and get Leon positioned properly. And even then, aiming with the R button and shooting with the A button is just such an archaic notion at this point. I mean, damn, want to know how to reload in the original? Hold aim and then press B. I'm not even kidding you, look at the manual, dude. So obviously, 18 years later, developers have figured out how to make shooters with smooth-feeling camera controls, realistic gunplay, switching guns on the fly, cleaner-looking animations, higher frame rates, and all of that jazz. But really, the mechanic that changed the gameplay the most for me from the original was the knife. Yeah, the knife was in the original too, but all it was ever really good for was breaking barrels and awkwardly swiping at the enemy for 1 damage because you were all out of bullets. But in the remake? Ooh, if this isn't the coolest thing included in RE4 Remake, then I don't know what is. It is so utterly satisfying to perfect parry enemies within this game, and what's really badass is that almost every single attack is parryable. So if you know what you're doing, Leon just becomes this untouchable, utter badass killing machine, and you can get some seriously cool-looking gameplay going as a result. It's just a shame that Leon within Remake is anything but a badass, at least when compared to the original. The characters within Remake are what really bring this game down for me. Well, what do you mean, Quick? Aren't they the same people? Well, not exactly. You see, with RE4 Remake, they decided to take a different approach to storytelling and how they presented the characters than from the original. From the first few hours of the game, you can tell that the developers wanted to bring RE4 back to the series' roots. By that I mean, they want you to know that this is a survival horror game through and through. And in doing so, they remove a lot of the character that the original had in spades. And I don't just mean from Leon, but he is a prime example of this. In the original, Leon feels like a battle-hardened badass. He's seen this shit before with Raccoon City, and is no longer that scared policeman who just made it out of a zombie apocalypse his first day on the job. There's also a real sense of personality to him as well. He flirts with Hunnigan on their first radio transmission.
Loud and clear. Somehow I thought you'd be a little older.
Commenting on her appearance, and all around takes a lighthearted approach to the mission at hand because, again, this isn't his first rodeo. You can see this in each and every cutscene. For example, when the villagers first bring out El Gigante, They're struggling to pull him in by ropes, and El Gigante just pummels them and splatters them across walls when the situation gets out of hand. And when he focuses his attention on Leon, Leon smoothly does a backflip to dodge the swing as the cutscene transitions into a boss battle. And it's such a great way to not only show how strong the enemy is, but also how much more badass Leon is in comparison. Now, let's look at how Remake presents El Gigante.
Jesus Christ! Whoa! God damn, you're a big boy.
You see what I mean by the devil's in the details? He busts out of the door on his own, just a generic scream at Leon as Leon says, "Jesus Christ!" There's none of that detail with the original, with the villagers pulling him out by rope and the backflip. There's no flair in the remake cutscene, in my opinion. And again with the village chief. When first introduced, this is how the showdown goes.
Perfect. The big cheese. What?
And now for Remake's depiction of this encounter.
Joder, not this guy!
Who are you? Okay, stop right there!
It plays out much more seriously and, in my opinion, with a lot of what made Leon taken out of it. But again, Leon isn't the only character who suffers from this. The village chief, Ada, Ramon, and especially Sadler. Part of the problem is due to the casting decisions, in my opinion. The voice acting in Remake is just piss poor compared to the original.
Skills?
Skills? What does that even mean? What, Leon catching you is a skill?
Skills?
But it's also the change in tone with this game that's to blame as well. With Ramon, for example, he's turned into such a generic one-note villain. There's nothing that I can say about Ramon Salazar in RE4 Remake that makes him stand out from the crowd. He says Mr. Kennedy a lot to try and recapture the magic of the original character, but fails miserably. I love how when you first meet Ramon in the original, he lets loose this chilling cackle and you're like, oh shit, who the hell is that? And it immediately sets the stage for who Ramon is going to be. Ramon is somewhat of a prankster. In the original, Salazar would toy with you, interfering with your communications with Hunnigan.
Hunnigan, what happened? The transmission got cut off. Salazar, how'd you...
We've jacked the line.
Preparing traps for you to fall into, leaving invisible insects in the sewers for you to contend with and then telling you about them, a ceiling that is constantly closing down on you, and many different cutscenes with him bantering back and forth with Leon to make him an unforgettable enemy. In Remake, he does absolutely none of this, and honestly, when I killed him in Remake after his boss fight, all I could think was, that's it? In the original, finally killing Ramon was a huge accomplishment after overcoming so many different obstacles that were meant to kill you. Whereas in Remake, Ramon simply feels like an afterthought, rather than a genuinely entertaining challenge to overcome. You know Ramon shows up a grand total of 4 times in the remake? 4! 4 cutscenes is not nearly enough to flesh out one of the main antagonists of this game, especially when all 4 of those cutscenes play out super similarly. Which also brings me to Sadler. I don't really understand how they managed to ruin 2 iconic villains so spectacularly, but they did. And I understand why they did it, but it's just funny to me that by wanting to make the game more scary, they somehow made Sadler, the big final villain of this game, feel like even less of a threat. You see, Sadler has the Salazar problem. In the original, Sadler makes an appearance as soon as you rescue Ashley, and what an appearance it is.
When the eggs hatch, you will become my puppets. Involuntarily, you'll do as I say. I'll have total control over your minds.
He's barely even seen or mentioned throughout the game in Remake until the final few chapters, where he spouts some generic cult religious nonsense in an attempt to sound spooky until you RPG his ass in the next chapter. Lewis is really the only character I feel that was presented a bit better in Remake, as there's a whole entire chapter where you play together with him. So in my opinion, it hits a bit harder when his death comes around this time, so I have to give the game some props there. And having Krauser kill Lewis this time instead of Sadler was a nice switch up and definitely makes the fight with Krauser that much more intense. If anything, the final boss of this game should have been Krauser, because that was one of the only boss fights in the entirety of the remake that actually made me feel something. Not to mention the fight itself is just fun in general. I just wish Remake had more of that and less of whatever this is.
You talk too much. Failed. You vulgar, utterly uncivilized.
I really do feel like trying to make the remake feel more like a traditional horror game was the wrong stylistic choice. Because when you think about it, in a lot of ways, there were a lot of terrifying moments in the original, and while RE4 did have its actiony moments, if anything, it was a nice offset to the horror in my opinion. The regenerators, the invisible insects in the sewers, the iconic villains, Vertigo, and especially the music. Playing through the original recently, there are a lot of set pieces where the background music mixes with the environment that you're in. Generally, there are a lot more noises in the original game than in Remake, where everything just feels way too quiet. The most egregious example of this is during the castle section. Crowby Cat does a great job of showing the difference, so just take a listen. I'm not sure why they decided to take out so much of the religious chanting and ambient noises that happen during this section. It adds so much to the environment and creepiness of the situation, and it feels like the developers almost think making things quiet equals making them more scary. It's funny to me. The whole point of this remake was to make things more scary, yet in a lot of ways, it's less scary than the original. From the way the villains are presented to the way the environments have been crafted. One last thing that I feel was barely touched on in Remake that should have been more prominent was the Las Plagas parasite in both Leon and Ashley's bodies. I feel like it's barely touched on in Remake that this virus is taking a very real toll on both of their bodies, at least until the very, very end. In the original, it feels like a very pressing subplot and that the clock is ticking, because you can see Leon progressively getting worse and worse throughout the game. After the fight with the sea monster, just look at this scene and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. In Remake, this scene is simply explained away with, "Oh, I passed out, heard hurt." The original does this too, but when coupled with the previous scene, it's some very blatant foreshadowing that something is clearly wrong with Leon, and I feel it's very important to convey just how dangerous the Las Plagas parasite is and what's gonna happen to the rest of the world if you fail to stop Sadler. The only thing that really indicates this sense of urgency in Remake is Leon's vision of Sadler. And like I already said, if Sadler felt even remotely like a threat in Remake, maybe this scene would have been more impactful, but it just didn't hit the same for me as the original. Leon gets so out of control towards the end of the game that he violently chokes Ada, unable to stop himself, which is just such a chilling scene. By the way, that scene has been completely removed from the remake. Why? I just don't get it. I also want to touch on inventory management within the remake, or to be honest, the lack of it. Again, playing through the original recently, a good chunk of my time was spent in my inventory because, well, I didn't have enough space to carry everything I found along the way. I had to put off buying the TMP because I simply didn't have the room for it and everything else I was trying to sandwich in my suitcase somewhere. And when I did finally buy it, I had to be really selective about what other items I picked up, because my suitcase simply couldn't hold all the resources the game was trying to give me. and I was just dying for that suitcase upgrade when I finally got it. I even had to remember where I left certain items so I could go back and pick them up again whenever I had used up some of my resources. Whereas in the remake, I don't think I left a single item behind ever throughout my entire playthrough. And remember how much fun it was having to essentially play Tetris trying to make room for resources in the original? The need for that is completely gone with the press of one single button: auto sort. What is the point of having a suitcase if I'm never in any real need of any space and the game automatically sorts my items in the best way possible every single time? I don't know, call me crazy, but part of the fun in the original was finding a way to fit that new item you picked up somewhere in there, even if it seemed impossible. And with AutoSort, that fun has been completely removed for the sake of convenience. This one is a bit of a subjective complaint, but it's one I wanted to talk about, because like a lot of things in Remake, it's just another minor charming detail lost to make more of a streamlined experience. I know all these things seem like such minor complaints, but they really do add up in the grand scheme of things, because all these minor details add up to make such an interesting, horrifying, and complex storyline all at the same time. And with many of these details being removed in the remake, the new experience feels like a watered-down, wannabe version of the original. All in all, Resident Evil 4 Remake is by no means a bad experience, but for me, it will never be able to live up to the original because of these changes. And I just wish a bit more care was taken to ensure that what made the original so special wasn't left out of the remake, and to not replace it with what Capcom thought Resident Evil 4 should have been in the first place. Because the result, for me anyway, was not what I remember Resident Evil 4 so fondly for.
She's like a part of me I can't let go. Let's leave it at that.
With that, I think that's gonna be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully it won't take me another month to come out with my next video. If you enjoyed, please make sure to like and subscribe, or Leon's gonna come roundhouse kick your ass.